All right, so we're going to talk first off about the Unix Hot Backup product. We're going to go over the basic architecture of Unix Hot Backup, how you're going to prepare your system to install, configure, and run Hot Backup. We're going to go over some testing and monitoring techniques, and then what you would do for a failover. Basically, Unix Hot Backup, it kind of derived from the tape transaction logger. It uses the same queue mechanism and the same type of transactions that you would see with the transaction logger if you were doing transaction logging to tape. For that reason, you cannot run Unix Hot Backup in tape transaction logger at the same time. You have to choose one or the other. The Unix Hot Backup product is, to me, it's a far superior product, and the reason why I say that is because when you're logging your transactions to tape, you kind of just hope and everything's there, and that the restore is going to go okay, and to get your system back up and running, there still is this element of where you're going to have to do a restore and apply that transaction log tape. Where with Hot Backup, you have a live, fully licensed secondary machine that is up to date. It can be pulled and queried just to make sure that things are in sync while everything's working, and so forth. The way Unix Hot Backup works is we've got basically there's two processes that are going to communicate with each other. One on the main system, which is sometimes deemed the master or the primary, and another on the secondary or the slave server. They both run in the background as phantoms, but they don't use a real phantom port. What Hot Backup does is Hot Backup will start these two processes as phantoms, but they will be the very last real PIB or port on the system. The backup machine should be equal to the primary machine. This is one of the things that we saw early on with Hot Backup, is what a lot of people would do when they would configure their Hot Backup machine. They would have a production machine, and when that production machine got old and was not able to keep up with the business, they'd buy a new machine, and more powerful, more memory, more processing power, and they'd stick their old machine that wasn't very powerful and such as their Hot Backup machine. The problem is if you're really using Hot Backup the way it's intended, where you may have to fail over that machine, you want that machine to be just as powerful as your live machine, because you may be failing over to it. Hope you're not, but that's why we have it. And you may have all your user load on that secondary machine. So you really need to not skimp on that backup machine. One of the things that we did in our last session that we talked about was, one of the things that you can do is you can have a primary machine, physical on your site. And if you have a cloud solution, you could also make your backup machine out in the cloud, and that seemed to be kind of a good type of configuration for Hot Backup. Some of the things you also have to do is Hot Backup sometimes isn't just a plug-and-play thing. Your application has to be kind of tuned to work with Hot Backup. As I discussed on the last slide, the two processes run as these phantoms, and those phantoms, for the most part, usually are started in the DM account. And so the slave server, the backup server, as it's consuming these transactions and running out of the DM account, it's doing all the transactions that the main server is doing, and so you need to have things fully passed. And some of the things that we find that people hang up on is possibly indexes that are doing file translates, and normally the application would be able to just handle it because you're on your main system, you're running in that account where that file probably resides, but on the backup system, the slave system, like I said, that slave server is running out of the DM account, and things need to be fully passed. When you set up Hot Backup, you need to decide how you're going to log files, and there are two schools of thought here. We have the ability to say, I'm only going to log the files that I mark to be logged, and that is done by changing that file's D pointer from a D to a DL. Or we can say, I want to log all files, and then there are certain files that I want to choose to not log. And if you choose to log all files, we definitely recommend going through your DM account. In fact, by default, a lot of the errors files and the different log files that you're going to find in the DM account are already marked as DT out of the box, just so that those things don't get logged over in a Hot Backup's configuration. Other things within your application, if your application is written to where you have temporary work files that are getting built when you run a report, those files you may want to create as DT files within your application, because if you fail over here and you're going to run that report, you're going to probably want to recreate those temporary work files, and those transactions don't really need to be logged. Basically, to set up Hot Backup, you're going to do a file save of your primary system with no users on, and queuing the transactions. If you're in queuing transactions, the fact that users are on the system, it becomes not as important as it used to. And so while that file save is going, and if you have users on the system, any transaction or any file update will get stuck into the transaction log queue. The reason why I mention it, because on the next step where you restore the data on that secondary machine, you then define your two servers on the Hot Backup primary and the Hot Backup secondary. And when you start those servers, those transactions that have been accumulating while you were doing your save and doing your configuration and are in the queue will automatically dequeue and get updated onto the backup system. These are kind of just sample commands that we would use. There is a Hot Backup menu system on, and we'll go through that as we set up and define these two Hot Backup servers. So once you start the primary and the secondary server, you can clear a file on the secondary and basically touch that file on the primary. The touch command is a command that was basically come about for Hot Backup, and it's a way that you can go through and basically file every item within a certain file so that the updates get put into the Hot Backup queue and then sent over to that secondary system. And then you can do things like you can do compares and counts by counting the file. And the other command I like to use when I'm trying to verify the validity of a Hot Backup is checksum, because checksum will go through a file byte by byte and calculate a checksum, and it's probably the more accurate measure of whether the two systems are in sync. You could have a file that has the same number of items, but those items could be totally different in content. Some of the key commands that you're going to want to do when if you're trying to monitor and maintain a hot backup system is you're going to want to monitor the hot backup queue. The queue for hot backup, like I said, as a update gets done in a file, you're going to that update gets put into the queue, and it in anticipation be sent over to the slave. That queue is not a file. It's an internal structure to D3, which basically is just a linked list of frames. And if for any reason that pipe between the two systems is broke, that queue is going to build, and we're going to link on more and more frames, and those frames come out of overflow. And so you want to maintain that queue to be very small for two reasons. You don't want to run your system out of overflow. That could be disastrous. There is a queue limit that you can set in Hot Backup to prevent that. However, the second is all these transactions are queued up on the primary. So if that primary fails, anything in the queue that has not been sent over to the secondary system is going to be a lost transaction. And so there may be some, transactions that you lose. One of the things that we're looking at doing for the second go-around of Hot Backup in one of the next releases of D3 is to try to move the queue off of the primary on the secondary to prevent that loss of data if the primary goes down and the queue is backed up. And the other thing that you can do, a lot of times I'll use command line commands to be looking at the queue, but you can also look at it through the TX log menu on the main system. Like I said, some of the things you're going to look at is you're going to watch the phantom job. Doing aware on the process and such can give us ideas when Hot Backup, what's going on when Hot Backup's not dequeuing. Is it stuck on a lock? Is it in the debugger? Certain things like that. And the biggest help in trying to debug a Hot Backup issue is just starting the servers in the foreground. And just in my experience, normally 9 times out of 10, the problems are going to be on the slave. Why the two servers aren't talking. So the procedure that you would go through if you were going to fail over, I'm kind of going to detail here, maybe a controlled failover and a not controlled failover, an actual unplanned system outage. So if you were planning to just, for whatever reason, testing the failover procedure, which I would recommend doing from time to time, is you would log all the users off the primary system, turn off dequeuing on the primary system so that no further updates get stuck into the queue, and ensure that the queue gets emptied by monitoring the Hot Backup queue with the commands that I noted earlier, and I will show you when we demo Hot Backup. You're going to turn callx triggering on the secondary. The reason why I mention this is we recommend you turn callx triggering off on the backup system. Usually the callx triggers that people use within their application are updating supporting files when you make an update, And what you really should do with the CallX is have those, if that information is important for the application, those files should be being logged as well. And if that's the case, you don't really need to be running the CallX trigger again on the backup system. So there's a command, CallX on and CallX off, which will just enable or disable the CallX trigger. So you're going to turn the CallX triggers back on the secondary to prepare it to be the primary. And then you would just either change the server name or update your DNS so that the IP address of your old primary server becomes the IP address of your secondary server, and then your users will just reconnect, and they'll be connecting, and they won't even know that they're on a different server, other than that there will be that little bit of downtime. Some other references that you can read through, the Hot Backup administration is in the D3 Unix System Administration Guide, and you can get all that documentation on the Rocket Software site. Hot Backup is cheaper than the downtime that you're going to have in trying to recover the data off of the disk. Brian came up with this line. I mean, and I love it because it's like users can remember what they did 5 minutes ago. They're not going to be able to remember what they did that morning if your system goes down at the end of the day. As Ross mentioned earlier too, you can use that secondary machine for queries. You could do any kind of processing there that wouldn't be doing any update. And you could also actually run your file saves on that secondary system. And that's all I got for that part of the presentation. Do you want me to go into a demo now, Ross? Is that, or is Brian going to do his FSI?
Why don't we go and do your demo?
What's that?
Why don't we go and do your demo?
Okay. Let me end this. And so what I have here is I have my two servers defined. The blue screen is going to be the backup system, and the black screens are going to be the primary system. Now, before I get started, can you see my those PuTTY sessions okay, Ross? Sometimes the font isn't very good on the laptops or whatever, so I just want to make sure that it's readable there for you.
Yeah, I can read them.
Yeah, okay.
It might be worth pointing out what the machines are and where they are, what you've actually got running. Okay, so
these are two Linux systems. They're each VMs on a VMware server, but they're on separate VMware servers. And in fact, before I start, I'm going to bring up the VMware server for my master system, because as part of this, I'm going to just crash it while we've got updates going on. So it's Linux. Each of them are running the identical copies of D3 10.2. All right. And forgot my password.
And it's worth pointing out that the machines have to be the same in terms of D3, the same release, same patch level release, same number of users across the two machines, but they don't both have to be either virtual or hardware. One can be a real machine on site, and the other can be a virtual machine in the cloud.
Right. And and these two machines are not licensed the same. I mean, they are different user counts, but like Ross said, normally in a hot backup configuration, they're going to be the same license count. Because that secondary server, you want to have license to handle your normal user load. So let me get on here. So we're going to log into the DM account, and basically what we do is just type in Hot Backup to get into the Hot Backup menu. Now this is a system that I don't have a Hot Backup server defined, and this is where it's really maybe just a terminology thing, but it's when I'm talking about a new server, what we're really just talking about is defining the process that's going to communicate to the other process. So you can give it any name you want. I try to be descriptive on what it is, so I'm going to call this guy the HV master. You define what type of a server it is, whether it is master or a slave. You give it the host name or the IP address of the slave server. So let me get over here and log into my slave server. And get the IP address and plug it in here. Hot Backup, these two servers are going to communicate over a TCP port. We choose port 2000 by default. You can change this if you want to any other TCP port that you want it to communicate on, but they've got to be, both servers need to be using that same port. You're going to define the VME name on that backup server that the transactions are going to go to. With D3, you can have multiple VMEs on a server, and you want to make sure that, I mean, if you wanted to, you could create 4 VMEs on that on your main system. They could all be doing hot backup to 4 different VMEs on the backup system. And in fact, one of our largest customers and the largest user of hot backup has basically this configuration where they have 4 VMEs, all hot backup, doing hot backup to 4 VMEs on their slave system. I'm just going to use my default pick 0. And these are different polling periods. I normally don't mess with these or find a reason to do so. And then you're going to see when I start hot backup, we're going to start getting messages and things, and this is the list of the users that you want these messages to go to. Once that's all good, you can say yes, and then we get into this the choice that we want to make. Do we want to log DL files only, or are we going to log all files? I'm going to just do DL files, and we're ready to go. You notice that I get a queue size that I've got 0 frames in the queue right now. I'm doing DL files, and it gives me a limit. This is what I was talking about, where we want to set a queue limit. So once that limit is hit, there will be no more transactions will be put into the transaction queue. It'll stop in queuing. At that point, the systems will go out of sync, and you will have to resync the two systems by doing a save of the master restoring it onto the backup system. But this does prevent you from running out of disk space, which is a way worse headache than resyncing a backup system. If I do escape, I will go back to the main menu, and this is where I would start the Hot Backup server. But before I start this server, I'm going to come back over to my slave server and do the same thing and create a slave server. And I guess I should have done this before just so you could kind of see that this is the version of D3 I'm running here. Oops. And this is my version of D3 I'm running here. Okay, pretty much the same. This one is licensed for 13 users. This one is licensed for 13 users. What? Is that right? Guess so. Thought I had more users here. So they are licensed the same. Okay, so to define a slave server, you do the same thing. Go into the Hot Backup menu. There isn't a server defined here, so I'm going to choose it. I'm going to name this guy the HB slave. It's going to be a slave type. You notice that it skips the remote host because it's the master that's going to pull out to the slave. Keep the same TCP port. And this option, one of the things that you can do with Hot Backup is you cannot have multiple slaves to one master, but what you can do is you can have a slave be a master to another slave, and so forth and so forth, and so on, and it's kind of a daisy chain effect. And so if you're going to set this server up to actually also log updates to a third server, you would turn the log slave update on. Because what happens is when you start that slave server, it actually turns off in queuing for the port that the slave server runs on, because you don't want to build up a queue on the slave server that's going nowhere and basically run your slave out of space. Again, this is where you would give the users a notify list. Apply updates on. You can turn updates off on the slave, which means that they will then kind of be queued on to the secondary machine. I don't ever recommend doing that, because what that does is all the updates that are coming from the master get put into a file on the backup system that can quickly get out of sized. And when you go back to apply the updates, it's going to kick off some phantoms to do that work, and there's a lot of contention. So I kind of don't use this feature of Hot Backup. The auto create on means that if I have a transaction come over for a file, and either that account or that file doesn't exist, Hot Backup will create whatever it needs, whether it be an account, whether it be a file, to put that transaction in. Normally you wouldn't have that going on, but if you, for some reason, created, you've got a file that you're not DLing or something, and you're moving it over, you can run into this situation. Just confirm that, and now we're ready to go. So I'm going to start the the backup server first. And so it went out and it started on port 15, which you can see here. It's running as a Phantom, but it's not one of your normal Phantom ports. And you will also see it here in your list open jobs. I'm going to go back into the Hot Backup menu, and I'm going to hit Start on the main system, and this is where you'll see the two systems will begin talking, and you can see that it started the master server on port 99 because I have defined 100 ports on this system, and it started doing it's kind of a test. What Hot Backup will do is every so often it will send over a test transaction just so you know that everything's talking, and when that test transaction doesn't get verified by the master, you'll start getting messages, and sometimes that happens when the queue gets backed up too much because that's where the test transactions get put. So what I'm going to do is I have a count here called HB test, okay, and these are the files here. I'm going to come over here to HB test, and you kind of going to see the same files here. So I'm just going to create a file. Right? You're going to see that I now have, didn't come over. And it didn't come over because I configured Hot Backup to only log DL files. And so when I created this file, I didn't mark it as a DL. And so normally what you would do is add an L option to your create file, which I forgot to do. But what I can do is use a set DPTR command to add that L option to my file. And by marking that file as DL, you're going to see that it then created it over here on my backup system with the same size and also marked it as a DL. Because if this system becomes the master, you're going to want the same files being logged. I'm going to copy some data. Into my file. 6,636 items were copied, and if I count D3 hot.test, I got them all there. I do a checksum of this file. This is kind of what we're looking at as my checksum. And you see that they have the same checksum and balance out. If I don't want to spend too much time because I want to give Brian enough time to go over what he's going to present. I think I kind of ran too long here, but you know, if I create indexes on this file, those indexes will be created on the backup system. Move file, rename file, delete file, clear file, all those operations all translate over onto the backup system. And so with that, I will pass this back over to Brian or Ross. which one?
Yeah, pass it back to Brian, if you don't mind. While Brian's getting the control, I'd just like to say, if people have questions about what Brian's just gone through, maybe now's a good time to start putting them in. We'll probably get to the questions at the end after Brian Cram's done his presentation. But if you start putting your questions in now, we'll get them ready for Brian Glassick at the end. Brian Cram's going to go through the difference between D3 Hot Backup on the Unix platforms and how FSI Hot Backup on Windows differs from that.
Okay. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep,
I'm going to start with I'm going to go through this very rapidly. The one thing that you need to remember from this presentation more than anything is that MBS and Ross and his cohorts are here to help you with this, to answer questions. Anything they can't answer, we're here to answer questions, and it doesn't have to be broken. If you just need to ask questions, you can contact support, and we can go through it on a one-on-one basis. If you need help configuring Hot Backup, we do that every day. So if you don't see it here, or you don't quite grasp what you saw here or retain what you saw here, you can have as many second chances at that as you need. Okay, first of all, let's see, let me go through the architecture. The first thing you should do is review D3 Windows System Admin Guide, not the reference manual. Reference manual is where you go for everything, but everything in Hot Backup is covered in the System Administration Guide, not in the reference manual. The replication is FSI only, and that's because the transport mechanism is via Windows RPC, and the VME doesn't know from RPC connection. So it's FSI only accounts via an RPC connection. The queues are actual they differ from D3 Unix Hot Backup because they are actual files in the FSI DM. Once you configure Hot Backup, you'll see an FHB file with one or more data levels. On the primary, you'll have an FHB, P, which is where your primary system enqueues all transactions. On the secondary, there's a main queue called FHB, S, which is where the P file on the primary is replicated to, and then there are some support files, FHB, 1 through X, as default 1 through 3. These are sub-queues to help with distribution, the workload of applying Hot Backup, which you'll see later. On the this differs from D3 Unix Hot Backup. D3 Unix Hot Backup is one phantom running on each server in a push-pull configuration. In FSI Hot Backup, the primary system does absolutely nothing. It's down in the monitor. It will enqueue records, but after that, it has no knowledge of the secondary server. Everything is done through process on the secondary server, which does an all-pull. Basically, what it does is you have 4-ish phantoms running on the secondary. The main phantom on the secondary goes over to the primary and pulls the records over, writes them in its own queue, assigns them to a helper, then deletes it from the primary queue on the primary server. There's one main phantom and several helpers involved, and you'll get a chance to look at that. In terms of system prep, not much different. I've told people before, they want to buy you need to buy a nice server. Where you really need to spend your money is on the width of the connection between the two machines. I've seen guys try to back up heavy systems on DSL connection. It just doesn't work. And a 9600 baud modem isn't going to make it either. So you need to get as good a connection as you can between the two machines. Also, we talked about making your application Hot Backup friendly. Brian covered a lot of stuff with that. There are some applications that you may have where at end of day you run some reference file rebuilds, and where you're making like maybe thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of writes to something that you may not want to enqueue those writes because you'll flood the queue. Any of you application guys out there who ever, had trouble syncing up a reference file, that referenced PO number to an order number or something of that nature, know what I'm talking about. Just like the Unix Hot Backup, you either select all files or the DL files only. We recommend on the FSI side to do a DL only. Select what you're going to back up and eliminate, and not DL things like work files and things of that nature. You will start enqueuing on the primary and dequeuing on the secondary in the cold start procedure, so that if you shut D3 down, bring it back up, that it's already taken care of for you, so you don't have to remember and then thus get out of sync. I'll show you an example of that in a bit. Again, configuring Hot Backup, you do the file save on the primary, the restore accounts on the secondary. Because you don't have to, because a lot of your infrastructure, like the FSI DM account and the DM account, you're not going to make changes to anyway. So you would just, make sure that your accounts don't exist and do a restore accounts on the secondary. Issue collects off to disable triggers and an FHB off to make sure that enqueuing is disabled on the secondary. Okay. You will then set up the two hot backup scenarios just like Brian did in the hot backup menu. The command on D3 Windows is FSI Hot Backup on the primary, and you answer a couple of questions. One of the things that I recommend is that you make the modulo bigger than the default. And on the secondary, I would shorten the default sleep time, and I will demonstrate that in a bit. Then you start up and test Hot Backup, FHB-on, with an option A for all lines on the primary. That'll make sure that enqueuing is happening on the primary. And then there's a command FS space SSC on the secondary, which will start up all of those phantoms that will do the pull and assignment and application of data to the secondary database. Then one of the things that I like to do, I like to take a file that's on the secondary system and clear it. And then I touch that file on the primary and then list the file on the secondary, and you can see that all the records came over. In terms of monitoring Hot Backup, there's an FHB status on the primary, so you can make sure that enqueuing is enabled and at what level it's enabled. Counting the queues. Since these are D3 files, it's a lot easier to inspect them. Do a count. The .p file on the primary, do a count on the secondary, and if one of them keeps growing, you know something is wrong. You can also do something programmatically to monitor this. I have an FHB util account that I have some tools in to monitor the stuff, and I'll share those with you. We do have some tools to measure throughput so that you can see how long it actually takes a transaction to get from one side to the other. And I also have written an account comparator that I can share. Okay. Now let me just go ahead and set this up. I have two machines here, two FSI machines. And you can see. Oh, wait a minute. Since you guys are Australian, we can do it like this. Get the same. So these are both 10.2 Windows machines, and we're going to set up. I've already done my file saves and everything of that nature. So we're just going to set this up. You elect whether you're setting up the primary or the secondary server. For the primary, I like to use, that's my favorite module, just one shy of 50,000, because it makes the queue, it's not that hard to select a file of that size, and if for some reason you have stopped dequeuing in the secondary, it won't get into really bad overflow, until you really start pounding it. And then just confirm it. That's all you have to do to set it up on the primary. And escape. And now if you can, let's see, who am I? DM. Here you go, FHB. this is your this is the actual file, and this is the actual queue right here. This FHB, P. The primary servers file is a configuration file. It shows you what your servers look like. And so let me go to the SQL demo account. Well, let me just list FHB, P. You can see there's nothing in there. Now, if I issue this FHB on and an FHB status, you can see that the global enqueuing is enabled, and so is local enqueuing. Now, let's do SQL demo. You can see that none of my accounts are DL'd yet. So let me do a set D pointer. And that will include that the A switch will set all of the files in the account and the MD itself to be replicated. Okay, so that's why I'm going to FHB. And now if I touch customers, and now if I CT FSI DM FHB, P, you can see that I have a file full of enqueued items. All right? Now, let's go over and set up this. There's a little bit more of information on the secondary. So let's do FSI Hot. Well, first of all, let me show you. Right now, I just have one user on the system. Okay. So if we do an FSI Hot Backup, I'm configuring a secondary. I have to answer a few more questions. I'd like to stretch this queue, but not as big as the other one. Just one shy of 5,000 is my recommend. Number of subqueues, 3 is usually fine. Idle sleep, I usually like to shorten that to 3 seconds. Primary host name. This is the host name of the guy on my left, which happens to be BCO2, which is, I'm actually running the primary on my laptop, and I'm running my secondary on a cloud server in Denver, I think. Might be Denver or Waltham, so it's either 1,600 or 3,000 miles away. Auto start, I usually select no here because I handle the auto start through the user cold start. Ignore failed operations. This is the way that you, if an operation fails, it'll continue with the rest of the queue. We do not recommend that you take this option unless we will usually trigger this in support if we're trying to skip a particular transaction. But this is something you don't want to do. Don't try this at home, basically. Confirm, and now that is set up. So now if you see, you can see now we've got the FHB file over here. We have the secondary servers instead of the primary servers record, and we have the SQ right here instead of the P, and then we also have these queues here, 1, 2, and 3. Okay? So now if to start the process, I do an FS SSC, which will launch a phantom, which will start the processes. Now, a lot of people freak out when they see that stopped. That just means that the job that starts the other jobs is over. So if you do the last two, you can see now that I have 4 phantoms running. And you can see that I have the main server and the helpers, 1, 2, and 3. And they're all pretty much sleeping right now. So, wow, already took care of them. So let's do this. Clear. got over there pretty darn quick. Let's edit one. Okay.
Do you reckon that's going to duplicate, Brian?
Yeah, it probably will. I want that message duplicated throughout the universe. Okay. Let's do this. I'm going to file it. So it's it's pretty snappy.
And that's 1,600 miles away.
And that's through a couple of satellites and a left turn at Jupiter and then down into the Denver office, right? At this point, I wanted to talk about, there was a line in Brian's presentation about hot backup is cheaper than disk recovery. Where that really came from is I have a good friend. I was his consultant for a while. Now he's one of our beta customers, who had a lightning strike in his facility, and he lost his D3 server. This happened at 1:30 in the afternoon. He went to his order department and told the first girl, "Remember what you did today since the last night's backup." He went to the next desk. "Remember what you did today." He went to the third desk. "Remember what you did today." And after the third blank stare, he said, "This isn't going to work." So he immediately contacted me, asked if I knew anybody who had disk recovery. We took the hard disk out of his server and ran it down to Western Digital, and we did a disk recovery on the hard disk, and we were able to recover his database. A day and a half, and about $7,000-8,000 later, we had him back up. Okay. Basically, he's a 32 years of system. I haven't done the math recently, but if he had been running hot backup, he would have been back up within 5 minutes, and it would have been cheaper. So that's what I'm really talking about when I say hot backup is cheaper than disk recovery. In his case, it was literally cheaper than the cost of recovering the disk. Ross, unless I forgot something, I think I'm done.
I just want to pick up on something Brian just said, and that is that we're here for people. If people want more information on hot backup, if you're not running it and you want to know how to get started on it, then please let us know. If you are running it and you would like to do more with it, or you're getting stuck on it, things aren't quite working the way you expect, then please let us know. And as Brian said, we've got the Rocket guys supporting us.
And Ross, I might add that includes Kathy Gargas over in our office in. I assume she's in our office in Sydney, and Ben Peach we've been working together and hipping them on hot backup. So we have the Rocket resources in your time zone as well.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I'd just like to thank Brian Glassick and Brian Cram for their time and their expertise to present the hot backup product to us today. I hope it was useful to people. I know that there are people on the call that aren't terribly familiar with D3. That's also okay. If you're kind of new to D3 and you're kind of new to hot backup and you're not quite sure where to get started, and yeah, the same message goes. Please let us know. We can help you out. So if you want more information or you'd like a quote on hot backup, please contact your MBS account manager, and we'd love to